There's now one being sold, and listeners, if you're interested, you can Google this, that puts a virtual pet inside of a vape, where in order to get money to feed your virtual pet, you take hits off the vape. That's how you earn the money. Like, you literally have to kill yourself or your pet dies.
I had to sit with that for a second. That's not a metaphor. That's a real product being marketed to kids. It sounds like satire, but it is not. And what we're up against, it's not just substances, it's systems.
This is Pathways to Prevention, the podcast that sparks conversations shaping the future of drug prevention and recovery. Powered by the Drug Free America Foundation, we bring together leading voices like policymakers, researchers, faith leaders, prevention experts, and real-world changemakers to tackle the biggest challenges in the fight against substance misuse. From breaking trends to innovative strategies, we explore what works, what's next, and how we can all make an impact. You're here because you care about creating a world free from the grip of addiction. Together, we'll uncover the stories, solutions, and strategies that drive meaningful change. Thank you for listening. Now, let's get started.
Hey friends, welcome back to Pathways to Prevention. I'm Dave Closson, and I'm so grateful you're here with me. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is all about real conversations that matter. Conversations with people who are working to build healthier communities, support youth, and challenge the systems that make prevention harder than it should be. And today, we are going deep. My guest is Dr. Aaron Weiner, a licensed psychologist, national speaker, and one of the clearest, most compassionate voices in prevention today. Aaron's background is in addiction treatment, but like many of us, he made the shift to prevention after realizing that waiting until people are in crisis just isn't enough. In this conversation, we talk about what we're up against, not just in terms of substances, but in terms of business models built on addiction. We unpack emerging threats like flavored nicotine pouches, gaming vapes, and the rise of psychedelics, marketed as wellness. But we also talk about what works, things like emotional literacy, safety at home, and how adults can lead by example. Whether you're a prevention professional, a parent, a veteran, or just someone who cares, this one's going to challenge you and inspire you. So take a breath, settle in, and let's get into it. All right, folks, welcome to the show, Aaron. It's a pleasure to see you again, and looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Oh, likewise. I think this has been a long time coming. We've run into each other at a lot of conferences and spoken about this very moment, and now it's here.
I know the buildup, and I can't wait. So, yeah, as we embark on this journey of a conversation, could we kind of open up with just a little bit more about sort of who you are and what you do? I know in the intro, I teased it out a little bit, but for our audience, could you kind of just unpack that for us, please?
Absolutely. So I am an addiction psychologist, and I've got a history on the treatment side, very much solidly on the treatment side of the fence. I grew up in the VA hospital system and then switched over to private hospitals, eventually moving into leadership roles. And when I was at that vantage point, something that occurred to me, which isn't to say that there's anything wrong with treatment, it's incredibly important, but something that really struck me very strongly was that we as a society, we've got these systemic concerns that we're not going to just resolve through treatment alone. And that there's a lot of folks who are struggling with addiction, who are struggling with mental and behavioral health concerns that grow over time. And they're afraid to talk about it. There's a lot of stigma around it. Sometimes there's a lack of resources, but for whatever reason, it grows in secret. And so I thought to myself, I'm spending a lot of my time here helping pull people out of the water, if you will, if they're unable to swim in a river or something like that, and trying to pull people out. What if I help stop people from falling in? And that I thought that there'd be a lot of just personal meaning from that through information, giving people the information they need to make the best decisions for themselves.
Aaron's journey from treatment to prevention is powerful on its own. But what makes this conversation really stand out is how closely he's tracking what's happening right now across the field. Because if you're in prevention work today, you already know. There's this strange mix of momentum and uncertainty. We've made real progress. Programs are working. Communities are changing. But there's also this tension in the air. Like, will the funding keep up? Will the policies support us? Will people keep paying attention when the headlines shift? And that tension, that lived reality, isn't just something I've felt. It's something I hear all the time from professionals in every state. So I asked Aaron, what are you seeing? What's the real pulse of prevention right now?
So I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of concern. I think it's an odd combination because on the one hand, if you look at substance use rates, particularly amongst youth in this country, we've made tremendous progress. And that hasn't been by accident. When you look at rates of vaping, when you look at rates of THC use, when you look at rates of overdose death, even overdose death, which we've talked about so much, it's the first time in well over a decade where we've seen the sustained decrease. I think right now the year over year on overdose rate death decrease is over 20%. It's somewhere around 25%. It's this incredibly just absolute optimism. Like when you look at this line, this trend line going down, it's fantastic. And it hasn't been by accident. There's been so much important work being done at the prevention and public health spheres that have been trying to reduce overdose deaths, stop people from going into the pipe of addiction. Everybody's been doing amazing work. And there's these huge funding concerns right now with some of the downsizing that's going on in government and some of the changes that have come even to our own prevention community in terms of how so many folks in our field are funded by federal dollars. There's this thought of, oh man, like we're finally getting our legs beneath us. We're finally pushing back. While at the same time, there's some shifting players in terms of the addiction for profit industry, pivoting to different angles. Are we going to be able to pivot with it? If we lose funding and we can't have as many DFCs, what's going to happen then? Are we going to see kids go back in that direction as a way to cope with stress, which is right now for them very high? We don't know. So I think that we've done a fantastic job, and I think that people can recognize that. We can look at the data and say prevention works. But then when we look to the future, there's this big question mark because without the backing to do prevention work, you can't do prevention work.
I want to pause for a moment. Have you felt that tension too? Celebrating success, but unsure how long it can last? As Aaron and I kept talking, one thing became crystal clear. The challenges we face in prevention aren't just about substances. They're about systems, about entire industries built around the idea that someone's suffering can be someone else's paycheck. And the truth is, we're not just up against risky products. We're up against business models that depend on addiction to survive. Whether it's alcohol, gambling, cannabis, vaping, the goal isn't moderation, it's escalation. The goal is lifetime customers. And if that sounds harsh, just wait until you hear how it actually works.
So you can call it addiction for profit. You can also call it, to a certain extent, I think colloquially known as like vice industries. But these are things like gambling, substance use, et cetera. These are all products that make money off of addiction, where if you can get someone, particularly someone young, to start using the product and to get chemically or behaviorally addicted to the product, then you get to make as much money as possible from that person over the longest period of time. And there's not too much concern for their health or well-being. There's just, it's very much like a cash grab. So to give you an example, about 5-6 years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision that allowed states to create sports gambling apparatuses. And so where I'm based out of in Illinois, we do have sports betting. And lo and behold, here I am now, and I'm seeing people in my practice for sports betting problems because now this has been made available. And one of the aspects of this that to me is just the most stark is that when you're talking about sports betting apps in particular, like the sort of thing where you can do it from anywhere, they have all the data. Like these companies, these websites, they know exactly how much money you are spending and losing. And they could tell extremely easily who has gambling problems and stop them from engaging in that behavior if they want to, but they don't. They never have. Casinos never have. Cigarette companies never have. Alcohol companies never have. Cannabis companies never have, because they operate with the same 80-20 rule that most businesses do, where 80% of your profits come from about 20% of your customers. And when you have 1/5 of people consuming 4/5 of the substance, that, or gambling behavior, that's what addiction looks like. And it's this, that's the quiet part. People don't say it out loud, but you couldn't have these large corporations without the disease that goes along with it, without the alcoholism, without the cannabis use disorder, without problem gambling. So they've got to have it. And so it's just always this dance, but that's the industry. And they oftentimes change the product, change the face as regulations shift with them, but it's always there.
Let that sink in. That's not dysfunction. It's design. Because what we're talking about here, it's not just a few bad actors or isolated products slipping through the cracks. These industries, whether we're talking about big tobacco, gambling platforms, the cannabis industry, or now flavored nicotine or gaming vapes, they don't just tolerate addiction, they rely on it. Addiction is the business model, and the more vulnerable someone is, the more profitable they become. And here's the part that really gets me. Most of the kids and families we work with, they have no idea. They think they're making their own choices, that this product or that app is just something fun or relaxing or harmless. But behind the scenes, there are data teams and marketing departments studying exactly how to keep them coming back. This isn't freedom, it's manipulation, and it's happening every single day. And just when you think you've seen the worst of it, the game shifts. The tactics evolve. What used to be hidden in plain sight is now wrapped in wellness, convenience, or even innovation. These aren't your typical substances. They're rebranded, repackaged, and in some cases, gamified. And they're showing up in places that prevention leaders and parents never expected. Aaron started laying out what he's been seeing in the field lately, and honestly, even I was stunned. If we were to say, what's coming down the street right now, to then also say, what's just around the corner that might be coming our way? What are you seeing there as you look at the data and as you have conversations with folks?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, because sometimes it goes from things that are a little bit more benign to things that have more serious implications. So I got an email. It's this automated email I get every month, my Google search console for my website. They're kind of doing the report out. And what it said is the fastest growing page view spot on my site is the blog post I wrote actually a while ago about aromatherapy vapes. So like Monk and Fume, if you've heard of these, which are, they're vapes or vape-like devices that deliver essential oils into you. You put it in your mouth. Theoretically, you're not actually supposed to inhale it all the way into the lung, but there's no guarantee that's what's going to happen. They're marketed as being the healthier alternative to vaping because it's quote unquote, just essential oils. The problem, of course, is that although they are not addictive, you're not supposed to suck on a reed diffuser. You know what I'm saying? That's not what they're designed for. There's a reason why they diffuse out into the room. And the few studies that we have show that essential oils going right into your mouth and lungs are bad for your health. And different oils also have negative impacts in different ways. So it's tough to study, right? So if you're inhaling some citrus essential oil that has a differing effect than mint, say, for example, in terms of the risk profile. So it's just another one of these areas where they're seeing an opening, right? Oh, we know people want to quit vaping, so let's try this other thing. And they're surging into that. So that one's less about addiction, but more just about it's kind of orbiting that same sun. On the addiction front, I think we're still seeing trends around vaping that are disturbing, where video games are being put into vapes. We're seeing a big push into funding for flavored nicotine pouches as well, Zyn being the most common brand for that. That is very much up and coming. There are little blips here and there as well of different things, like the hemp-derived semi-synthetic cannabinoid industry, which I think many of our listeners are aware of, but this is like your Delta-8 THC, for example. Kratom is another product that's doing a strong regulatory push. So there's all these little things here and there. What rises to the top of the heap, it's kind of hard to say, but it's always shifting.
I'm not a gamer and I'm not a person who vapes. Did you say they're putting games in vapes.
Yeah. So in disposable vapes, so still very low price point, like under $20 or less, you're not just getting the vape that has a tremendous amount of nicotine in it, sometimes quite literally as much as 100 packs of cigarettes in one vape. But kind of the original model that I saw of gaming vapes had things like Tetris in there, Pac-Man, it's like pretty basic games like Space Invaders, that sort of thing. There's now one being sold, and listeners, if you're interested, you can Google this, that puts a virtual pet inside of a vape, where in order to get money to feed your virtual pet, you take hits off the vape. That's how you earn the money. The most cynical thing, like you literally have to kill yourself or your pet dies, is basically what the paradigm is. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so you can buy that one now.
So far, we've talked about products that are clearly harmful, vapes that look like toys, nicotine pouches that taste like candy, tactics that scream manipulation. But not every threat is so obvious. Some of the most dangerous shifts we're seeing now, they come disguised as hope, as healing, as wellness. Let's talk psychedelics, cannabis, and microdosing. These aren't being pitched as vices, they're being framed as solutions. And to be clear, there is legitimate research happening in this space. There's nuances, there's potential, and I'll be the first to say people are hurting. They're desperate for relief. So when someone hears, take this and feel better, it can sound like exactly what they've been waiting for. But what Aaron and I both worry about is how fast the market is moving and how quickly people are being sold big promises with very little truth or context behind them. And this next part really hits home for me as a veteran, as someone who's lived with PTSD, who's carried trauma. I understand the draw. I know what it feels like to crave something, anything that might bring peace, even for a moment. So I get why psychedelics feel magnetic right now, especially in the veteran community. I've felt that pull myself. But what I've come to learn through my own healing is that real recovery doesn't happen in a single moment. It doesn't come from a bottle or a retreat. It comes through process, through people, and through time, and a whole lot of showing up when it's hard. And that's where we're headed next, into the blurry lines between hope and hype. I want to just touch on psychedelics and also the cannabis industry as well. What are some conversations you're having in those arenas?
Yeah, so fortunately, as of right now, we're not seeing particularly high usage rates for psychedelics amongst kids, which is really great to see. Young adults is a bit of a different story, as well as, well, I'm not sure if middle age is the right term, but whatever the 25 to 35 demographic is where this really seems to be catching on the most. And the good news about that is that we're not seeing too much underage use at the moment. It's not, particularly in terms of risks and harms, the most well-studied, but there are absolutely concerns that I would have when you're introducing agents that are that potent into the young developing brain. The critical element about both of those industries is there's been a lot of, I'm not sure if greenwashing is the perfect term, probably for cannabis it is, but maybe less for psychedelics, but they've been portrayed as these health and wellness tools. Like, get over your other mental health problems through the use of fill in the blank. And even if there's a lot of nuance there, people are just kind of like going over it with this very fuzzy, gauzy paintbrush. Like psychedelics, for example, is actually a huge category of different compounds that work through different neurotransmitter systems in the brain. Some work with serotonin, some work with glutamate, that one's ketamine, some work with more on the dopaminergic axis. They work in different ways. Yeah, we just say psychedelics as if MDMA and psilocybin and LSD and ayahuasca all share the same properties, risk profiles, and utility, which they don't, even in the clinical trials, much less what's going on right now, where they're being basically with the same sort of system that we saw happen with cannabis. Instead of going through the FDA and getting good research, there are these end arounds being created to capitalize on public interest. So like, let's just create a dispensary system or a healing center system because people want it. Forget about whether or not it actually works. People think it will. As I forget who said at first, placebo is a hell of a drug, but it is. And, if people believe hard enough, particularly when you're going through with, say, psychedelics, a very intense sort of experience, it's very easy to take that to a place that isn't necessarily supported by evidence, which isn't to say that there aren't some very promising applications for these compounds, but the research is still young, and what's going on in clinical trials does not mirror what's being pushed out commercially or in the couple of states that have authorized it. So that's that side of the fence. And cannabis has a lot of similar characteristics where when you actually look at the research, there are some applications and symptoms where cannabinoids are useful, even THC in some rare cases, but that does not necessarily resemble what's being sold in terms of high potency flower and concentrates. And the marketing in those industries, for example, is all over the place. And as I alluded to before with the semi-synthetics that are derived from hemp, but chemically changed to be intoxicating, those have virtually zero research for any clinical efficacy. And to be honest, in terms of their harms. And it's more like, oh man, we just found out that there's these potential harms. Now we won't sell that anymore. But it's already been on market for years. So that's kind of the system of those two products that we're seeing right now.
Where my concern is, I get a lot of messaging across my social media being a disabled veteran, and the psychedelics that are being talked a lot about in the veteran space. I don't want to name names, but there's there's two fairly prominent veterans influencers, I guess is what they would be called, that were very open about sharing their psychedelic treatments, but have since, 2-3 years down the road said, that didn't really work for me. I've actually had to, go a different route. And, one individual actually talks about now he's given up alcohol. He's in full recovery, and he's found his faith. He's found God, and, openly talking about like that's the path, not the psychedelics that he traveled to a different country to do for quote treatment. And I'm glad to see some folks with big platforms starting to share that side of the story, but it's still a lot of concern in my world around that.
Yeah, like that particular element I know is one of like hope makes people do some crazy things sometimes. Like they say things, they try things, or if you want to believe something really hard. I will say this though about when it comes to PTSD treatment, and when we talk about psychedelic research, for example, couple thoughts. One, anecdote and evidence are not the same thing. And that's really important. There are absolutely certain folks and cases where it has helped them, but is it 1 in 10? Is it 1 in 5? Is it 1 in 2? That matters in terms of what we say is medicine. And then the other side of how many people experience adverse events, that matters too, in terms of what we approve by the FDA or even how we market or sell things to the public. If someone goes into a treatment knowing full well, like there's a 1 in 5 chance this goes well, there's a 3 in 5 chance it doesn't affect you, and a 1 in 5 chance, my math is off, but that this goes really badly, and they consent to that, then, we can talk about if that's what we want to do or not, and when and how to do it. But it's another thing to say, like, this is the panacea for all of your ills. And I know for me, I was so sure reading some of the early studies that when we're talking and recording right now in early 2025, that MDMA would have been approved by the FDA through the type of therapy trials that were being done. Because that's the thing, it's not like a once and you're done sort of deal on these trials. It's like a 16-week process with a lot of therapy from trained therapists. Like that's the model that's being done. It's used as a catalyst for change, not the change in and of itself. And that's, I think, also a really important point. But when it went in front of the FDA and you actually got to see the trial, it was so bad. It was so unethical. The data was so poor. And I remember hearing the decision being like, how is it so resoundingly smacked down in terms of like, no, we're not approving this. Because of course you hear the proponents being like, oh, big pharma just wants to keep them down. This is, the conspiracy theory sort of stuff. But when you actually read the report and you hear what was presented, it was like, oh my, like this is not what science is, guys. And I think that like that standard of saying, like if something's going to be speculative or experimental, risky, like let's be honest about it. But we do have controls in this country for that because we don't want people being harmed. We don't want snake oil on the market. And if a procedure or product wants to, pass that muster and show that they are what they say they are, then do it. But what we saw in that so far was just basically a lot of cheating, deception, wishful thinking, falsification of records, obfuscating of results, like really, really bad stuff. And so I do think that there's some promise there when it's used in the right way, but I also think that how you use it matters. And you also do have to prove that it works. And that's a great example, though, when you talk about influencers, because right after that came out, there were, I think, multiple senators who were petitioning, being like, veterans need this. How about we give them treatments that work? Like maybe that should be what we push, not speculative experimental things.
Not every threat looks like a threat. Some are wrapped in wellness, in healing, even in science. And that's when things start to get blurry. Psychedelics, cannabis, microdosing, and plant medicine. For some people, these words carry a promise, a path forward, a spark of relief. And listen, I get it. The need for new tools in the mental health space is real. People are hurting, and we should absolutely keep searching for solutions. But when profits get involved, when marketing outpaces research, when complexity gets flattened into clickbait or influencer posts, we risk leading people towards something that's not healing, but just another form of harm. And in the veteran space, this hits hard. Psychedelics are being sold as miracle cures, especially to those of us carrying trauma. But real healing, it's more than a powerful experience. It's more than a weekend retreat. It is a process, a long one. And it takes more than medicine. It takes people, practice, time, and integration. And that's what I want for veterans, for young people, for anyone walking through pain, not just a breakthrough moment, but a whole journey back to self, to wholehearted living, to whole self living. So let's take a pause here, because this episode has covered a lot already. And if you're feeling it, that mix of frustration, urgency, and maybe even some grief, you're not alone. This next part, it's where we shift from what we're fighting against to what we're fighting for. This is where the action begins and where hope lives. With the trends, the new nicotine pouches, the flavored pouches, the games on vapes, and the conversation around psychedelics and the uncertainty that we're all experiencing. And I know our youth are also experiencing that. There's a lot of adversity in the world these days. And what can we do as far as prevention, as parents, as peers, as friends, to help equip our youth to be able to face adversity and persevere and thrive?
Yeah. And I'll give my best take on this, but I think everyone's got their own perspective. So I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. If you've read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, his theory of circle of concern versus circle of influence. And for listeners who aren't aware, the idea is that we have this large range of things that we care about. That's our circle of concern. And inside of that, a much smaller circle is what we can actually influence. And where you put your energy matters a tremendous amount. Doom scrolling, for example, that's straight up circle of concern outside of our influence territory, where we're just reading about all the things that are happening in the world and in the country and all of these things that we literally can't do anything about one way or the other. And we might just be sitting there worrying, or maybe we're frantically posting on social media or whatever it is. That doesn't help us. And as you invest energy in that circle, the one of concern, your influence shrinks because you're spending all of this energy in an ineffectual way. But if you focus that on your circle of influence, which is where you can actually do something about the things that you care about, that does do something and tends to expand your influence the more you invest in that area. So when it comes to kids, I really try to first and foremost, validate feelings, help them express, name, talk about what they're feeling, why they feel that way. validate that it's okay to feel the way they feel, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Feelings do not make you weak. They make you human. How you deal with feelings is what matters. And that first step is identification and processing. But then what you do with it also matters, because we don't like that feeling of tension, right? Of tension, of concern. You want it to go away somehow. And the way that I see it, you kind of have two divergent paths for where you can go. One is the more isolated, like fall in internalizing route, where you shut out the world, where you spend time in your room, you spend time in your phone, you spend time in video games, you might numb out with substances, but where you feel paralyzed, that you can't do anything. And so you just want to try to not see it as much as possible. The other side, though, is action, where you say, okay, well, I can't do all things, but how, at least in my corner of the world, in my community, in my school, my house, maybe in some cases, what can I do to help with this? And that's investing energy into your circle of influence. And I think there's a huge component right now where kids, they don't have the self-esteem and self-efficacy that they ideally should have. They don't feel like they can do it in so many cases. They don't have that confidence in themselves. Confidence comes from experience, setting a goal, executing it, and then reflecting on it and feeling good about what you accomplished. That is what builds confidence and self-efficacy. And so whenever possible, creating those opportunities for kids to work on a problem that they care about within a scope that they can do something about, and then see that success, those are the building blocks of an empowered citizenship, of an empowered youth.
Everything we've talked about so far, the systems, the strategies, the silent threats, it can feel overwhelming. But what gives me hope is that we're not powerless, because when Aaron talked about the circle of concern versus the circle of influence, it wasn't just a prevention framework. It was a life lesson. One I needed to hear, and one that I've had to live through myself. In my own healing journey, especially as a veteran navigating PTSD, I learned that I can't control everything. I can't fix the whole world, but I can control how I show up, how I listen, how I respond. I can choose to be a safe space. I can invest in what's within my circle, and that's where the change starts. So now we turn toward that next layer, the practical, powerful tools that help us build emotional strength, not just for prevention, but for life. Because emotions aren't the problem. Avoiding them is.
All right, so we're going to talk about the secret to emotions here in like 5 minutes. Whew, all right. You drive a tough bargain, Dave. All right. Well, so here's what I would say. The first underlying truth, and I'm going to say that that's a word scientists are not supposed to say. Truth and like proves, like T word and the P word you don't say. The truth is everybody has emotions, which I know is like a shocking thing to hear someone say. I know, right? But we try to pretend that we don't. And being professional, being powerful, we have all of these ways of self-presentation in which, traditionally speaking, we pretend we don't have emotions, or maybe we have a couple. Like, it's okay to enjoy yourself to a point. Definitely okay to be angry and upset, right? Particularly as men, like that's one that we can do. But actually the vulnerable ones, the ones where we show that we're feeling stressed, or we're feeling uncertain, or we're feeling sad, we're feeling embarrassed, we have regret. We all do feel these things. And what tends to happen, I like to describe not expressing your emotions. Like, people talk about like sweeping things under the rug, or just like stuffing it in. Emotions are like sweeping like a meatloaf under the rug. Like, you can't do that. You're going to smell it. This is going to be a problem eventually, like it's just, you can't do it. And so instead, what you have to do is you have to process it. You've got to come up with a way of dealing with it, because the pretending you don't feel the way that you do, lying to other people, or even sometimes people just not being honest with themselves, it does come back to bite you. And so if I had to come up with just a couple ways that help the most, the first is to give yourself time for introspection. And you can do that in a couple of ways that work really well. One is to, and this is going to be, a discipline plug, but see a therapist. I know I'm biased. I am one. I have one myself. I say any good therapist probably should, because otherwise, are we really practicing what we preach? but being able to actually have that space, not only just to explore your feelings, but sometimes like we don't see outside our own lens so well. So having someone to help us see our own lens can mean a lot. I think it would be very arrogant for anyone to feel like they see themselves perfectly. We all have our own bias and our own baggage. So I think that can be extremely useful if the option is available to somebody. The second thing that I would say is useful is talking with people you know and love and trust, because although there's a difference between a trained therapist and someone who you trust, just the opportunity to be seen, to be validated, to talk through your thoughts, that also can really help. The third one, though, and I can't recommend this highly enough, is to try meditating. Mindfulness meditation, I've been doing it, we're going to say near daily. It used to be daily. I'm in a near daily phase of my life right now for probably a good solid, I'm coming up on a decade now. I wish I had started sooner, because meditation, mindfulness meditation in particular, is all about watching yourself. I think people think it's like about clearing your mind. It's not really about clearing your mind. It's about watching your mind, and stuff just pops up. And it tends to be the things you care about, or that are like, you're going to understand so much more about what's going on inside of you when you just give your brain a little bit of space to get bored and go wherever it wants to, because that's what meditation oftentimes is about. You're focusing on your breath. Your breath is boring. Your brain's like, I'm bored, and it goes somewhere without your permission. Then you notice it and you bring it back. That's meditation in a nutshell. But you learn a lot from that process. And so if I had to just pick a few easy ways to get in touch with and to express your emotions, I'd probably go with those. I'd say 2 out of 3 of those are available to just about everybody. The third one costs a little bit, but 2 out of 3, everyone can access those, and they're actually really effective if you give them a shot.
Introspection and mindfulness meditation. Yeah, and I've got can't see it, but over here on my to-read book stack that I'll actually be taking with me on a trip this Friday is on mindful self-compassion. I've got that workbook, and that was my self-assigned homework from the end of my trauma recovery program till my next therapy appointment. I wanted to spend some time with that and work on mindful self-compassion. But yeah, I will underline and bold those 3. Popped in my head when you're chatting too, that actually one of my misconceptions pre-starting therapy was the understanding or realization that therapy was bringing me skills and tools and thinking processes and ways to deal with the ick that I was feeling. In my mind beforehand, I thought, I just, go just cry out all my problems, pour out all my problems, and I feel better. Like there's like tangible tools and action steps and going to learn how to be a better thinker. And like, I don't know if is that something that you've seen with your clients, like that misperception too?
Yeah, well, particularly if someone's coming from a therapist who might not be as trained in evidence-based practice. There's a type of therapy that I call hug therapy, which feels really good in the moment. It's like someone's wrapping you up in this nice warm hug, and it feels fantastic while you're in session, but then you leave and nothing's better. And I think that there's a lot of therapists who operate that way, but it doesn't actually bring sustainable, not that there's anything wrong with being supportive and warm and fuzzy and valid. You gotta be those things, but you also need to really make a difference in somebody's life. And I think that comes from giving them something that they can practice in the however many hours are in a week -1, like that they're not with you, which is most of their life. I think there's also an element where sometimes you'll see people come in and they'll be like, I've been having this issue for a long time. Like take like fear of flying, for example. Like there's some people, they're afraid of flying and they've been afraid of flying for years. And they're like, well, exposure is supposed to work. Like I get on planes for work every now and again, or to see family. And I'm still afraid. I'm still afraid it doesn't work. Well, almost invariably, that's because they're not doing it right. Because it's not just about getting on the plane. It's the mindset that you take while you're on the plane. The fact that you're there to learn something about danger, about your assumptions. What assumptions are you testing? If you haven't figured that out, then you can't test them, and the exposure it's not actually an exposure. So like there's ways. So yes, to underscore what you're saying, absolutely. There's a lot to therapy that is very tangible where if people aren't leveraging what they actually have, there's reasons why it doesn't work. I want to give you one other quick one because this is so fast. But one of the biggest misused objects like in the world, everyone has one, no one knows how to use it, is a stress ball. And so many people don't know. Like you pick it up, there's like squeezing it. They're like, why is this helping? Like this is just like a finger exercise. Yeah, that's because you're supposed to use it as part of a diaphragmatic breathing exercise where you breathe in through your nose into your belly, you squeeze, you hold, and then you release through your mouth and you release the ball. Feels like $1,000,000. If listeners have never tried this, go find one of the like 2 billion stress balls you may have around your house if you've been to conferences anytime in the last few years. Try that out.
That's the part that often gets missed in prevention. We talk about risks and substances, but we don't talk enough about feelings and what it really means to sit with hard emotions and stay grounded. What Aaron laid out there, the importance of naming your emotions, processing them, practicing mindfulness, those are more than just tools. They're survival skills. They're healing skills. And for me, they've been essential. Because I've been the person who bottled it up, who tried to power through. And I've also been the person who finally asked for help and started learning how to feel again. But here's the thing. If we want the next generation to grow up emotionally strong, we can't just give them the tools. We have to show them how to use them. And that starts with how we parent, how we lead, and how we create safe spaces for kids to be fully human. And that's where we're headed next. When it comes to feelings, from your practice, from your research, when it comes to the addiction space, where do you see the topic of shame or disgust coming up?
Well, shame oftentimes is a really big mountain for folks to climb when it has to do with substance use and addiction, whether or not we're talking about kids or adults, because people will look at their behavior and particularly its effect on others. Sometimes they'll feel shame about themselves and how they've hurt themselves or pain they've caused themselves. But a lot of times they'll look at family members and how concerned they've been, or money that they've spent helping them or sending them to treatment. And they'll feel this incredible weight. And that's really unfortunate because it holds them back from growing. And a lot of times there's this cyclic pattern with shame where people will feel bad, so they'll use a substance and they won't feel bad anymore. But then the fact that they use the substance will make them feel bad after they sober back up again. And what do they do when they feel bad? Well, they use the substance. So then they, and it just keeps feeding into itself and progressively gets worse over time. And the same thing can be true with kids and parents, where if they feel like they're going down this rabbit hole and like, oh, I can't tell my mom now. I definitely can't tell my mom or my dad now. Oh man, they kill me if they found out. They don't know what they're talking about anyway. There becomes these layers of negative thought and judgment, even if that's not even what's being said on the front end. It oftentimes is in there.
Follow-up question stemming from a virtual coffee chat I had yesterday where we talked about this, and you have a curiosity, not an answer. So that's why I'm throwing it to the expert over here. We feel like folks don't openly talk about shame. It's still like one of those things you sweep under the rug with the meatloaf. Why do you suppose that is?
It's a good question. So there's a really great book on shame. Many people have read it. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. And I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it yet. But much like with addiction, one of the tenets that Dr. Brown talks about in there is that shame is an emotion that's felt in secret. We have this idea that other people will no longer want us or judge us if they quote unquote knew the real us. And so we get into this mindset of we've got this idea, I am an unacceptable person. And we maintain that through avoidance, which is actually, we've talked a bit about trauma today and anxiety today. Avoidance is oftentimes the through line that holds all that together because you can't get any new information that might help change your viewpoint about yourself or your environment, that sort of thing. And so as far as shame goes, a lot of times people think that they're going to get a reaction from others that maybe mirrors how they feel about themselves and their own actions. when in fact, a lot of times we judge ourselves a lot more harshly than anybody else. If anyone's interested in a really interesting case study in shame and pushing into it, there's a podcast called Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, and get a famous podcast. But he's in recovery, and he had a relapse about, oh gosh, maybe it was 5 years ago now. I forget when it was, but he did a podcast about it actually, because he'd been lying to his audience for a long time about the fact that this had happened. And I think that the episode is called, I think it's called Day 6. Like he recorded on a 6th day of actual sobriety again. And it's just him completely coming clean about what happened, apologizing to the audience, to everybody, and just talking about what his journey looked like. And it was so amazing to see the outpouring of support when he did that. That everybody was just so thankful that he was okay, that he was back in a healthy place, that he was honest. And to me, like, that is one of the most instructive public facing examples of pushing into shame. Like, I'm not just going to be honest with my family about this, but I'm going to tell this literally to millions of people and memorialize it online, of me being just radically honest about something that I don't feel good about. And nobody thought any less of him. And he still has his podcast. And one would even say that actually that honesty, had he gone the other way with it, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe his outcomes would be worse. But I think we have this idea that the parts that we dislike most about ourselves are, one, disqualify us as people, but two, that other people will actively disqualify us or render the same judgment on us that we render on ourselves. And the vast majority of the time, it's just not true. You're probably human just like the rest of us who's made mistakes in your life.
I want to kind of hone in on the little bit you said about how, if a child or a youth is feeling shame, and how then that kind of compounded to, well, I can't tell my parents now, it'll be even worse. And I can't tell them now, and I can't tell them now. What can we do as parents or prevention leaders to create that safe foundation for youth to feel just that safe in coming to talk to us about stuff?
That is a really good question. The thing about feelings is they are not shaped through logic. They're shaped through experiences. So if you want someone to feel safe with you, you need to be safe with them, not tell them that you're safe. Like, you can talk to me about anything. That doesn't work so well. That's a start, but showing them that they can talk with you and that they will be emotionally safe is how you are safe with them. And that means even about tough stuff to talk about, right? That means that, like, as parents, creating a space for your child to talk to you about tough stuff. And then if they do that, see that as an opportunity to make sure to validate that they are okay. Now, I think a lot of times there's a lot we could talk about in terms of emotional safety, but if I had to go just to the most important element, it's that you can tell someone that they are okay, that you can understand their emotional reasoning, why they would make a certain choice, while not endorsing the behavior or the strategy. And I think that makes all the difference, right? Like, you can understand that it might have been, you can validate that it's very hard perhaps for a child to be the only one not vaping in a friend group, or that they might have felt like they needed to lie to you about a grade, and why it would be threatening to do that, while at the same time correcting that behavior and setting limits and having consequences. But they understand it's not because they're bad or that it's not safe to talk to you, because any of those short-term outcomes, like if they lose their phone for a period of time or whatever, that matters actually a lot less than feeling like my mom and dad love me and they care about me. It's part of why they're trying to shape my behavior, right? But what that means is that they're more likely to tell you the important stuff when you ask, or maybe even offer it up if they're feeling scared and unsure, because they feel like, you know what, no matter what happens, I will be better off as a result. And finding opportunities to demonstrate that is really the hallmark of creating a sense of safety for a kid. Kind of like, imagine a scenario, right, where your son or say you got a son or daughter who's in high school and their boyfriend or their girlfriend breaks up with them. It would be very easy as an adult to be like, this was a silly relationship in the first place. High school relationships almost never worked out. I didn't like that kid anyway. They have no idea what they're doing. What do you know about relationships when you're like 15 years old? And you can feel very dismissive. And maybe that comes out as something that feels supportive, like there's other fish in the sea, or, or it'll be okay, right? Which sounds really supportive, but actually is dismissive, because in those moments, they don't want to be told like it's going to be okay because their heart just broke, right? They want someone to be there with them, listen to them, validate that it's incredibly hard to get dumped or to have to end a relationship, or, like that. They want that validation and to be seen, which doesn't mean that there's not room for another perspective there to help with the coping process. But that's where the safety comes from, letting someone know that they are seen, they are appreciated, they are heard, not necessarily agreed with, but that they are okay and that they matter.
That idea that we have to be the safe space, not just say we are. That one really stuck with me, because the truth is, we all want connection. We all want to be known and loved, even when we're messy. But shame tells us we have to hide, that if people knew the real us, they'd walk away. And the only way to fight shame is with presence, with validation, with trust built over time. Take a moment and reflect. What small moment today could build emotional safety for someone in your life? Whether you're a parent, a mentor, or just someone trying to show up better, this is the work, and it's hard, but it's also beautiful, because every time we create safe space for someone else to be real, we help prevent harm before it starts. So as we start to wrap up this conversation, I want to come back to the heart of it all. What does prevention really look like, and how do we carry it forward?
I think I'll take us back to our conversation about areas of influence, and just particularly at a time right now where I think many of us are, particularly if you're listening from the prevention field, are very concerned about the future and what happens next. I think really just staying grounded in what you can do and being thoughtful, being proactive, and realizing we still have a lot of agency in what our future looks like, whether or not we're talking about what happens in our community, in our school district, in our families, in our own lives, with our own habits. There's still a lot of power that we can flex, as long as we don't spend it all worrying and fretting. And so, if you've taken the time to get this far into the podcast, I know you're probably one of those people who cares about consuming information, who cares about making a difference. Keep it up. You're part of the solution. I appreciate you.
This conversation reminded me prevention isn't just strategy. It is a stance, a daily decision to lead with empathy, to challenge harmful systems, and to build safety from the inside out. Whether you're a parent, a prevention professional, or someone simply trying to be better, the work you're doing matters. You may not always see the results right away, but every conversation, every moment of listening instead of reacting, every small step toward connection, that is prevention, and it's powerful. Aaron, thank you for the wisdom, the honesty, and for calling us deeper into this work. And thank you, listeners. Thank you for making space for those conversations, for showing up, for staying curious, and for being part of a community that chooses hope over hype and people over profit. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave us a review, subscribe so you don't miss what's next, because we've got more coming your way. Youth voices, school leaders, system shakers, and we're just getting started. I'm Dave Closson, and this is a Pathways to Prevention podcast, where prevention is better together.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Pathways to Prevention, brought to you by the Drug-Free America Foundation. Together, we're building a future where communities thrive and individuals live free from the burden of substance misuse. If you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who care about making a difference. Your support helps us reach even more listeners around the world. To stay connected and explore more resources, visit us online at dfaf.org. Let's continue to spark conversations, drive change, and create pathways to a healthier, drug-free future. Until next time, thank you for listening and for being part of this mission.